Okay, I'm going to show you about Immanuel Velikovsky, who was the one I've been posting about him. He was the hero in my world because he went out and did the research, and he did it from everywhere in the world. He got their written histories, and I now, with the mud fossil research and the Google Earth and all that stuff, I verify exactly what he said. Now here's what he has to say. Now this is under the Fair Use Act, where I can use this without infringing on anybody's rights. Now this is ETOTV, and here we go.
A revolutionary theory of the universe based on the records of the past has challenged the fundamental beliefs of modern science for more than 2 decades. Today, the unexpected findings of space explorations have confirmed many of the predictions of this theory, but the man who proposed it, Immanuel Velikovsky, is still rejected by established science.
Well, I've taken a lot, but they're not very good. You're in too close to most of them.
And if I transgressed and went into many fields of science and humanities, it was not because I was born a rebel. I was coerced to trespass. The belief that we are living in an orderly universe, that nothing happened to this Earth and the other planets since the beginning, that nothing will happen till the end, is a wishful thinking that fills the textbooks, and your textbooks are still of Victorian vintage. Is any physicist here who would stand up and defend the proposition that only gravitation and inertia are in action in the solar system? But of all my heresies, this was the greatest. And let me ask you another question. Is the theory of uniformitarianism, which means that nothing what happens but happened in the past could have happened if it doesn't happen today? On this is built the modern geology. On this is built the modern astronomy. On this is built the modern biology and theory of evolution. And so, it is only wishful thinking that we are living in a safe, never perturbed solar system on a safe, never perturbed Earth.
Something else I'd like to say is that they have no, when I say they, I'm talking about the academics, because that's who he was against, just as I am. The academics have no interest in the fact that we have some form of a God relationship. What gods, that's up to you. But I believe, as the things I have shown, these are gigantic creatures that are all over the earth. The dragons were here, the giants were here, everything they said. So I have to go with the gods too. What gods? That's up to you. But I've chosen my side.
Mountains were born, and mountains collapsed. Land and sea changed places. Great streams of lava flowed. The sea boiled and evaporated. Such were the scenes of unimaginable violence during the times of global catastrophe. In Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky describes the last two acts of this cosmic drama as recorded by the ancients.
See, the thing is, he had no clue that all of this stuff was biology. The Earth is just 100% biology. So is space. Things that are coming through space, comets and all that, they're just biology too.
At the time of Moses, 34 centuries ago, a giant comet, which later became the planet Venus, nearly collided with the Earth. On two occasions, the Earth passed through the tail of this comet and experienced intense heating and enormous tides, incessant electric discharges, rains of hot stones, and a deluge of fire. Velikovsky claims that some of the oil deposits originated with the hydrocarbons in the comet's tail. This is also the source of manna that sustained the Hebrews after the exodus from Egypt.
Here in the New York Herald Tribune, explosion in science, the artist's conception of what happened when the heavens burst. What happened during the 1500 BC upheaval, which we read about in the Bible as the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, and the phenomena or upheaval that accompanied that. And this is the artist's conception of what happened in Palestine and Mexico and China. Lightning, meteorites being rained down as the comet's head came closer to the Earth, followed by floods. Same in Mexico, where water swept over the entire land, great gigantic tides.
These were recorded by the indigenous peoples.
In a final collision with Mars, the comet lost the remnants of its tail and became transformed into the planet Venus. Now Mars traveled on an erratic orbit, and in the year 687 BC it nearly collided with the Earth. There were repeated changes in the Earth's orbit, in the lengths of day, the seasons, and the year. In these catastrophes, entire species of animals were annihilated. Others proliferated from wholesale mutations. Mankind was decimated. Civilizations destroyed. In Velikovsky's world, the heavens are a huge arena where giant comets are born. Planets collide, and huge sparks, thunderbolts, leap between heavenly bodies.
All right, I want to make an interjection here. I have discovered that there were battles in the heavens, almost certainly. There's body parts all over out there. I have shown them very clearly. And if anybody wants to confront that, I will certainly show that evidence. Omaru Maru is a finger, and Comet 67P is a tendon enthesis. They landed on it, took samples of it. It's biology now. And they've found RNA and DNA on all of the meteorites now. They're finding it everywhere. There's nothing but life that I can determine.
The whole idea of the recentness of cataclysmic events in this part of the universe, the whole idea of catastrophe and the use of science and it's being based on an orderly evolution of things, were very shocking ideas to the high priests of the beautiful symmetry of reason and the natural progression of it.
He knocked out a very strong prop for an obsolete form of science, which is what surprised me about the violence of the reaction, since I would have thought that scientists themselves had long ago left this behind, and that is Newtonian science, the science which relies on order, and a very simple kind of order, God.
I would just like to interject something else. It doesn't matter that the methodology, it's the truth that they reject. The methodology is nice that, they'd have some, anyway, let's go back to what he said. They had the symmetry of how the evolution of the Earth is going to go, and it's just going to be you know, it's pretty, you can forecast. Let's put the forecast. You can't forecast. Watch.
Worked out a very strong prop for an obsolete form of science, which is what surprised me about the violence of the reaction, since I would have thought that scientists themselves had long ago left this behind, and that is Newtonian science, the science which relies on order and a very simple kind of order. God, the geometrician, the clockwork universe that just was wound up at some moment in the distant past and now ticks away in its regular fashion. That he attacked, but on the other hand, he was long gone before he said anything about it. His notion that
Eric Larrabee, director of the New York State Council of the Arts. As an editor of Harper's Magazine, he wrote an article on Velikovsky in 1950, just prior to the publication of Worlds in Collision.
One of the surprising things about the pressure that the scientific and scholarly community brought to bear is that it succeeded. The book, the Worlds in Collision, then merely the first of the books, had been on the top of the bestseller list for something like 11 weeks, and nonetheless the publisher was so mortally wounded, is the only word, by the turning away of salesmen from the doors of professors' studies and all of the implications that went with this, that the book was transferred to another publisher which was willing to take it over, which, after all, is a fairly extraordinary thing in publishing.
Not only was the scientific press carping at him, and in a way that was violent, not in terms of an orderly discussion that this idea is yet to be tested and it takes more time and etc., but saying this idea is crazy and any man who has such an idea is mad, insane, that kind of thing. But the establishment through which men who think that way make a living, the academic establishment, was saying to this man, you know, you're not safe. Now, in the case of most of the young, being themselves, unhappily, is not...
Dr. Birnbaum, president of Staten Island Community College.
In the case of Velikovsky, there is something hard, and the cost of being himself has been very, very great. That is a condition to which I think the young profitably can be exposed. And if I had my way, every young undergraduate student in my college, every one, whether he's in the humanities or the hard sciences, would be required to examine the Velikovsky case.
Key is now, nobody even knows who he is. And if you brought him up in a class, you would be, you'd be in jeopardy. I'm not kidding you. You start talking against what you're told to say, and your future is in jeopardy. I'm not kidding, literally.
First, because the subject matter of what the man is standing for is very interesting. Very, very interesting. Secondly, because the subject matter is truly interdisciplinary. It's stretching. But third, because the human embodiment of the expression of the ideas, in a way, is symbolic of the problem the young think they are facing in this kind of a society, and which, in my opinion, they in fact are facing. Not only them, me.
See? Exactly. He can't teach. He can't teach what is reality. All right? Just I want you, don't miss this, because this is damn important. All right? He's talking about Velikovsky. Velikovsky's stuff was just like mine. It's very, very interesting. I don't know why people don't find it interesting, but anyway.
Very, very interesting. Secondly, because the subject matter is truly interdisciplinary. It's stretching. But third, because the human embodiment of the expression of the ideas, in a way, is symbolic of the problem the young think they are facing in this kind of a society, and which, in my opinion, they in fact are facing. Not only them, me.
Well, what is this condition?
The condition is the extreme professionalization and rigidification of institutions through which thought is supposed to occur. extreme to the point where it begins to contaminate the fluidity and looseness, the freedom to think.
Peer review has destroyed the human mind. You're not allowed to say something that the peers, that if you consider your peers, won't allow you to say. They'll say, that's not right. He's crazy, just forget about it.
Fluidity and looseness of ideas, of having ideas, and the freedom to think. And Velikovsky really wasn't taken on by the establishment simply because of what he was saying. He was also taken on by the establishment, in my opinion, because of his audacity in having such thoughts.
Another interjection. Velikovsky lived among these people. He was a peer to all these people, only he was above them, obviously. He was a friend of Einstein. They knew each other. He was no just guy off the street. He had all kinds of credentials. That's why they had to go against him so viciously, because he was so fully credentialed. Nothing they could say. So don't forget, he's talking about extreme professionalization. That's peer review. And if you don't fall in line, out you go.
And rigidification of institutions through which thought is supposed to occur. Extreme to the point where it begins to contaminate the fluidity and looseness, the freedom to think. Fluidity and looseness of ideas, of having ideas, and the freedom to think. And Velikovsky really wasn't taken on by the establishment simply because of what he was saying. He was also taken on by the establishment, in my opinion, because of his audacity in having such thoughts. The man... Yeah, go away, we got a sticker. There's a security force here. The thing about Velikovsky is that the ideas are so much a part of the man, have been so hammered into his own personality by the controversy, that the ideas themselves are his life. And this man is a fighter for life. He is a fighter for life. He's not going to be bowled over if they all say no. He's not going to give up life. And the survival of the ideas now are so much wrapped up with the survival of the man. And that's what makes for the bravery that we spoke of earlier.
Immanuel Velikovsky was born June 10, 1895, in Vitebsk, Russia. After receiving a medical degree from the University of Moscow in 1921, he practiced for a time in Palestine. Following a period of study in Vienna, he specialized in psychoanalysis. In 1939, Velikovsky came to New York to pursue research on Freud's three heroes, Oedipus, Akhenaten, and Moses.
All right, see, he went back and he studied the ancient texts. He went into all of the libraries, the museums. He got all of the ancient codexes. He talked to all the indigenous people, even people that they had no clue of these other people. They were all writing the same story at the same times. So there's going to be some validity in it, and that's what he found, and that's what upset everybody. And again, nobody will let me in to even speak. Him, he could speak, and they crushed him. So I have very little chance.
First idea that probably moved me into this direction, and which I followed since then, was the realization that during the Exodus occurred natural happenings we can call catastrophes, which are reflected in the story of the plagues, in the story of the crossing of the sea, in the story of the rumbling mountain from which they heard the Decalogue. And the travel in the desert, the wandering in the desert, covered with ash and some strange phenomena of food falling from the sky. If anything of this really happened, good chances would be that something would be also found in Egyptian story, in some Egyptian documents. In the books of Egyptology, you find nothing about a catastrophe during the long history of Egyptian people. So it was after a document of this nature that I went, and after several weeks I could establish that a certain document, a papyrus, written by a sage by name Upheaval, a papyrus stored since early part of the 19th century in the University Museum or University Library of Leiden in Holland, is exactly a story of the plagues described by an Egyptian eyewitness. So here I had a synchronical point between two histories, biblical and Egyptian.
The papyrus of Upheaval synchronized biblical and Egyptian events and led to a reconstruction of ancient history. Many questions debated for centuries found an answer. In the Bible, the identity of the beautiful Queen of Sheba at the court of Solomon was unknown. In Egyptian records, the land of Punt, visited by Queen Hatshepsut, could not be determined. In Velikovsky's reconstruction, it is clear that Punt is the land of Solomon and Hatshepsut is the Queen of Sheba.
See, he actually went out and did the work. That's the key. There's assumptions made now, and they probably throughout, well, I'm sure throughout history, that, you know, it turns you off so quickly that no true assessment of the material facts. Now, he's working with ancient texts and so forth, and which I agree now, but at some point, you know, I had reservations, obviously, because, you know, how do you back that stuff up? Well, I found all the stuff that backs it up. I found the stuff, mud fossils, and the way the Earth is constructed, and all of these things, they back up every word of it. And even the feared god Jupiter giving birth to Venus, I can see exactly how that happened from the Great Red Spot. Anyway, let's keep going.
The biblical story of Joshua, with the sun standing still in Gibeon and the moon in the valley of Ajalon, presented another realization.
I was struck by the fact that 2 lines or 2 verses before the story of the sun and moon disturbed in their daily motion was the story of large stones that fell from the sky and destroyed more of the enemy soldiers than the sword of the Israelite. And this combination, because combination of stones and disturbance in rotation of the earth, the ancients couldn't know that it was the earth that was disturbed in rotation. They thought the moon and the sun. Made me immediately to follow the path toward east and west. And I found without great difficulty that in Western Hemisphere, which means here on this continent, the story persists too. The story persists among the Redskins, it persisted among the Mayas, at the time when the continent was first conquered, the Mexico part of it, by the Spaniards, namely that the sun was rising just off over the eastern horizon when it dropped back and came a little up again and stand there without motion, and all the forests burned. Again, the Redskin could not know about the heat resulting from disturbance in the Earth's rotation. So, of course, this would be not enough. You had to go to all civilization, to Japan, to China, to India, to Persia, to Babylonia, to Assyria, to Asia Minor, to Greece, to Rome, to Judea, to Egypt, to Mexico, to Peru, to Iceland, and for oral transmission even to East Indies. And the same story could have been found in all places, but differently told, so that it was no question of just...
All right, he's saying the same story in different places on the earth, but differently told. Well, it's going to have different impacts in different areas on the earth, because what happened was this. All right, the earth is just normally spinning the way it normally spins, and it has an atmosphere attached to it. Now, Venus actually is the same size as the earth, and it came in like this and hit our atmosphere and pushed our atmosphere back. So the earth sort of rocked a little bit, and then it just stood still because of this impact. Took about a day to get through, or whatever, however long it took to pass by. And then the earth would start spinning again, because it's going to be being pushed by the spin around the sun. And eventually it would spin back to its normal spin. Whatever resistance it meets, it would start to spin again. Now, so he's saying they told the same story, but a little differently here and there. And that's what I'm saying, is one area is going to be affected differently than another. One is going to really burn, one is going to be flooded, one is going to be, whatever. It's going to be different impacts in different areas. And my particular area, everything I have here, is turned into a mud fossil. So that was fabulous for me. Now, Australia, everything they have there is like red bloody, and they have opals, because that's transition metal blood chemistry. And other areas have bubbling, boiling, this and that. So that covers the fact that there's a little differences in the stories here and there.
Varying from one nation by another. So this was the position. The story of human memory of catastrophes that took place in historical times, but strangely, despite the fact that they were described in so many sources, as if non-existent for the scientific world.
Exactly. Don't even care. Doesn't matter. Show me the evidence. Meh. Doesn't matter. I have so much evidence, and like I say, not a single one can stand up in front of me, so they don't. They just literally hide. And to be charging the kind of money they charge to make you say the things you have to say to become a geologist or a historian or any of that stuff, it's just not right. Not in my mind. So anyway, here he is. He's saying it's just as like it doesn't exist for the scientific world.
According to the earlier records, the origin of the Great Flood is Saturn, which was referred to by the ancients as a water planet.
And we have information in Midrashic sources that two filaments, I wouldn't like to say comets, filaments of erupted mass from Saturn reached the Earth and engulfed it in the edge.
How much
water fell. Enough to fill Atlantic Ocean.
Now, what was the water that fell? What was it like? I always liked that.
Water
The water that fell in the flood, what was it like?
was salty. What else can I say? It was a little warm described. It was salty. It was not really hot.
He's saying it was not really hot. I disagree with that. He's talking about apparently something to do with Mars and us and getting the water from Mars. I see it a little differently. The Earth is completely surrounded by gases, which is oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, all that stuff. When the two planets, well, Venus wasn't a planet at this time, but is hotter than hell, and Earth is just doing its thing, and it's getting cooked as Venus is coming. Now, they just glanced off of each other, just about hit, and that would compress the atmosphere, which is the hydrogens and the oxygens in the atmosphere, turning them into water. Compression of hydrogen and oxygen makes water. And it would be boiling water because the damn thing would be so hot from this intense reaction. And there might be fires in the skies too, because you got hydrogen and oxygen all over the place up there. So there was going to be hot water falling on Earth, I believe. And that was, I believe, a large source of the water. However, there's probably a lot of water in the Earth which was spewed out from the fountains. The Quran says the ovens of the earth burst open or something like that. The fountains of the earth, the ovens of the earth, something like that. And he's saying it was salty water. Well, salty water comes from the effluent of creatures' bodies, basically. You don't get salt from plants. You get salt from bodies. All right, so there's some things that he didn't realize about the products that are in space, about the biology that's out there.
Other ancient documents tell of the thunderbolts of the planet god Jupiter. Velikovsky understood that these thunderbolts referred to electromagnetic discharges between planets. This led to his claim that radio noises must emanate from Jupiter. In 1955, radio noises from Jupiter were discovered. It was this prediction and discovery that finally convinced Einstein of the merit of Velikovsky's ideas.
I knew Einstein since 1921 or 22. At that time, I came from Russia just after I obtained my medical degree. Einstein was already a famous man, actually in the prime of his fame. My idea was to bring together the Jewish scholars and scientists from various disciplines and from various countries in one work which I call Scripta Universitatis. It has a longer title. This was my beginning with Einstein. I was the general editor. He was the editor of mathematics and physics. We met again in this country, and in 1940, again in 1946, but our real debate started soon after I moved to Princeton in 1952. And for 18 months, we discussed one subject, always the very same subject. And the point in the debate, always the same, was whether electrical and magnetic fields are participating in the celestial mechanism, or only gravitation and inertia, as he would claim, because this was the view not only of his, but of all scientific community. And so, this was a debate. At one point in that debate, I offered in a letter in June on a claim that I made, that Jupiter sends out radio noises. And if you wish, I said, it will be easy to find out. He wrote his comments on the margin as usual. 9 days before his death, and he was in good state yet, he wished to see me. I brought the news. This was discovered. Radio noises were discovered by chance, and those who discovered them, two scientists of Washington, D.C., for weeks and weeks could not establish from where the noises came. They thought about some terrestrial origin, some neighboring station disturbance. Finally, they had to come to the conclusion that it was from extraterrestrial source, and namely, after more deliberation, from Jupiter. My wife was always present during those meetings, and after he died, she made the picture that you see on the wall. My wife was actually a sculptor, and she exhibited in the Metropolitan Museum and Whitney Museum and the Museum of Pennsylvania, Art Museum, many other places, got first prizes. But she was endowed with two talents. One is violinist, chamber musician, and the other is sculptor.
This prediction and confirmation of radio noises from Jupiter convinced Einstein to seek crucial experiments on Velikovsky's ideas. After Einstein's death, his estate wrote letters to this effect, but with no result.
Later on, when I felt, and I know Dr. Velikovsky felt, that a very considerable amount of evidence had piled up, which was very helpful, to put it mildly, to his side. And the resistance of the professional journals to taking all this seriously was still as great as it had been at the start. And I felt also myself a degree of obligation. I wanted to pay my respects to him, and I wanted to pay some of my intellectual debt to him. And so I wrote, and Harper's accepted, the second article, attempting to bring people up to date and give some of the items that had come along.
As late as 1959, the surface temperature of Venus was calculated to be roughly the same as that of the Earth. But in 1962, the Mariner probes to Venus found it to be 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The probes also found hydrocarbons in the atmosphere of Venus. In 1946, Velikovsky had stated these two tests, the heat of Venus and the presence of hydrocarbons, to be crucial to his idea that Venus is a newcomer to the solar system.
Now, my line of thought was this. Venus erupted from Jupiter only several thousand years ago. Jupiter, by the way, is 400 times heavier than Venus. And so it was the natal heat, and then the change of motion into heat when Venus, traveling on a extended ellipse, met on its way other celestial bodies, twice meeting the Earth. And electrical discharges also took place between Venus and other celestial bodies, even its parental body, Jupiter. These and other causes, radioactivity that was engendered, resulted in heat And Venus was observed by the ancient as a very brilliant incandescent body, rivaling the sun in its brightness. So it is also described by the Chinese, by the Babylonians, by the Mexicans. I claim that it might be close to incandescent. And finally, 11 years after World's Ecology was published, after the radio noises were observed coming from Jupiter, other planets were investigated on radio signals, and radio signals coming from Venus were found, but of different nature, of thermal nature, indicating that Venus is hot. It was unbelieved, and therefore the main task of Mariner 2, Mariner first one didn't succeed, of Mariner 2 in December 1962 was to find out whether Venus is really hot. At that time, it was found that it is something like 600 degrees, and the announcement was made that it's most probably a mistaken result. But at that time I wrote that most probably it will be found more than 600. And truly, a few months later, it was announced it is 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and today it's already found that it's over 900 degrees Fahrenheit on the bottom under the clouds. Okay. A temperature at which many metals are molten.
Following the confirmations of the Mariner probes, Velikovsky brought the success of his predictions to the attention of the scientific community. Dr. Motz, Department of Astronomy at Columbia, is a past president of the New York Academy of Science.
After Velikovsky had come to me, I agreed to write a letter to Science delineating his statements, his discoveries, stating that Venus would be found to be very hot, that radio emanations would be found coming from Jupiter, and a number of other things that we specified in the letter. So Dr. Bargman and I did indeed write that letter to Science, indicating that regardless of whether one believed this to have stemmed from Velikovsky's theory, his prior rights to discovery ought to be recognized. And then we indicated that we did not accept his theory as such, but we did accept his discoveries. See. After we had written the letter, the argument was started again, and people did write to me saying that I perhaps should not have done this because clearly saying that Velikovsky had announced these things did not specify the truth of his arguments. And I indicated that I felt that a person who had made an announcement, who had indicated certain things, ought to be given credit for these things.
Do you feel these are very unusual statements to have come true?
Yes, they are very unusual because nobody suspected that Venus would be as hot as it was found to be. And people had no reason to suppose that radio waves would come from Jupiter and that these other things would be found to be so, or the carbohydrates that are thought to be on Venus and things of that sort.
So why did these other scientists feel that this was not proper on your part?
Well, because they felt it would lend support to what they thought was an irrational theory, you see. As a matter of fact, there's nothing irrational about the theory. It is just, Velikovsky does not depart from accepted scientific arguments and scientific theories. It's just that there's no evidence that his ideas apply to this situation at all. See, that is the point.
What he was saying ran against what the high priests of the disciplines thought was the best evidence of the time. In the areas of his probe involved sectors where best evidence itself was questionable.
See, that's the problem there. Best evidence itself was questionable. Well, not in my case. My evidence is not questionable.
Was best evidence in those areas.
You cannot get a body to do what he says Venus did without altering entirely the distribution of masses in the solar system. The solar system is an extremely stable system. You can't make Venus change from one orbit to another in that way. The sun dominates. The sun is in the center, and therefore there's a regularity that cannot be altered.
All right, let's question that. What if Venus was born, literally born, from the feared god Jupiter, which is exactly what they said. And it could be Athena, I don't know, because the feared god Jupiter also, had Athena born from his forehead. Now, Jupiter and all of the planets and so forth that were gods, they could morph. If you read Ovid about, metamorphosis. Metamorphosis means like a caterpillar into a butterfly. They could change themselves into anything, and they did. These were the gods. Jupiter came down to Earth, turns himself into a macho-looking guy, and had sex with all the women. That's what they were doing. They were doing all that stuff, and they could turn themselves into butterflies, into fungus. I'm not kidding you. If you read Ovid, and he said they turned these creatures into the landscape, often by means of violence. All right? All right, now, remember, Earth and Venus are fairly equivalent in size. That is the red spot. Now, look at this carefully. These clouds are coming here, and they're circling around the red spot. The red spot isn't doing the circling. The clouds are coming off, and then they're doing this vortex thing after coming off this mound. This is called the Venus mound. Now, it's turning this way, and the clouds are coming this way. Now, if you have little kids and you don't want them to see female genitalia, I would tell them to go away, because you're about to see it. Now, again, Jupiter, you always think of him as a male god. Well, I'm going to show you something that most males don't have, but Jupiter seems to have one. And there it is right there. That is a vagina. It's a vagina. And this here, I forget what the name was, there's a majora and a minora of this outer tissue. But this is exactly, you can see right up there, there's the urethra, I guess they call that. And there's the vaginal canal, and there's the ripples that they have. And this is not really spinning. I don't think there's any spin going on here at all. I think this is just what hangs over the edge of the front of the vagina. And there's a zone right here. You see this? It almost looks like there was where hairs would grow out of there. You see that? And there's the seam at the bottom where it comes together. It seems to be illuminated from this side. And that is the close-up, the closest shot they've ever had of the giant red spot. And I believe Venus was born out of there. And I also believe that as it came to Earth and all the stones fell and all the blood came down and all the manna, that's exactly what you would get from an actual birth. You would have the baby, which is Venus. Then you would have the umbilical cord, which turns into stones. Oh, that stuff is nasty. It's really tough. Then you would have the placenta, which would be loaded with blood and all kinds of stuff, and afterbirth blood. And the manna would come from the placenta, because the placenta is nothing more than a sack of milk that the baby's feeding off of. And that would fall as cooked little flakes of I'm just talking, because the blood fell, all of these things fell, 100%. And that would all accompany a birth. Okay, what I just showed you was basically pretty shocking, and I think I should explain it a little better. What happened was there was bad gods that took over our Earth and just had a blast, did whatever they wanted to against God Almighty's will. And that's why they were destroyed and all of that business. Now, basically, that's what Jupiter and Mars and all those probably all ganged up together and said, all right, let's split up the solar system. And I guess that's what they did. And then they transformed themselves into like male models and came down and had sex with all the women that were on Earth because they looked so attractive. And again, they could morph. Read Ovid, O-V-I-D. It's called Metamorphosis. Hold on one second. All right, this is the Metamorphosis, and this was 8 A.D. It was written right at the turn of the millennium there. And it was as well read as the Bible. It was considered his epic work, and it is. It's absolutely unbelievable. Look at all the different books: the creation, ages of mankind, the flood, Deucalion, who is Noah, Pyrrha, his wife, Apollo, Daphne, Phaeton, Callistro, Mercury, Baltus, Jupiter, Europa. All of these are mythical figures, but these were all what was written. Now, listen to this. Metamorphosis. Transformation is a unifying theme amongst the episodes of the Metamorphosis. Ovid raises its significance explicitly in the opening lines of the poem. And he goes in nova ferta animos mutatus dicere formas corpora. I intend to speak of forms changed into new entities. He intends to speak of forms changed into new entities. Accompanying this theme is often violence inflicted upon a victim whose transformation becomes part of the natural landscape. The titans, the giants, the dragons, all of that stuff. He wrote about all this stuff. The theme amalgamates a much explored opposition between the hunter and the hunted. It's all about this crazy stuff that happened. It was written in the ancient Greek myths. Listen to this, a great variety of transformations. Humans into like the Nile River, constellations in the skies, into animals, into ants, into fungus and mushrooms, of sex hyenas and of colors into pebbles. The metamorphosis themes are often located metatextually within the poem. They think it's a joke. It was not a joke. He was writing what was written, and what was written, I believe, was very, very accurate. I can't account for it, but I'll tell you, the things that I've discovered stand behind this very, very clearly. Okay, so we're getting back here. They're talking about, oh, the universe is just the way it works, and it's all wound up and nothing can change. There's a regularity that cannot be altered. Well, let's see about that.
When I was born intellectually, reason reigned supreme at the University of Chicago. Even after World War II and Hitler, the answer to everything was man's mind. And the beautiful part of being a student at the University of Chicago then was the feeling that nothing was beyond the thought of man, and no problem was beyond his rational solution.
20 years ago, I thought you could persuade people. And now again and again, I think of that terrible remark of Max Planck's that you don't persuade people of anything. The believers in the old ideas die off one after another. That's all that happens. It's a very sad experience how little attention people pay to what one would think is convincing evidence.
Why isn't that a fact? Okay, my friends, this is running very, very long, but his last statement says it all. 20 years, he said, I thought I could convince people, and he's a writer of Harper's Magazine or whatever it is, And so he's in the thick of things, and he realizes there's just nothing you can do. These people are in control, and they don't care if it's true or not. They don't care if the students are learning the truth or not. It makes no difference whatsoever to them.